won't worry about it. But I pray that that is our prayer today. After I share with you what God's got on my heart for you this morning, that your prayer will be, God, be the strength of my life. That God will be the strength of my life this morning. So I want to start out this morning, and I'm going to ask you some questions that I'm going to see if any of y'all are going to answer yes. Okay? So, how many of you have had a life where you've had no difficulties? Your life has been easy peasy with no challenges. Who can lay claim to a life like that? One without challenges and difficulties. And you're probably thinking, well, Jimmy, what are you trying? You a comedian or what? You a comedian or you a preacher? So, you're thinking, who can really state that they've never had a life where they had any challenges? I would venture to say that there are a whole lot of us that cannot say that we have not had a life like that. I would probably say all of us could say that we've had a life where we've had where we didn't have any difficulties. How many times have you been in the middle of a difficult situation, a difficult time, and you just didn't know what to do? You didn't know where to turn. All you could do was just cry out to God, help me. Help me, because I had no idea what to do next. When we get in those tough situations, when we get in those situations and we feel helpless, sometimes we feel helpless that we forget that God can use us. He can use us as part of the solution, to our own problem. When we feel helpless, there are a lot of things we seem to forget regarding God and our problems. Nearly electrocuted in an accident in a construction site that put him in a coma for many weeks. Now, Frank was here this morning. He would talk to you about being electrocuted. Frank was an underwater welder, and he went in the ocean and welded underwater, stuff like that. He said it's nothing for him to get shocked all the time. He said he can usually handle that pretty good. But he said there's some of it that, he can't. But this guy here, Henready, was put in a coma because he was shocked. He was electrocuted. And Henready lost his lawyers fighting for his liability claims because one of them got disbarred, two of them died, and then his wife ran off with her lawyer. Okay? And Henready spent years fighting heart disease, liver disease. Wrecked his truck last year. And after the highway patrol got finished with him and they left the scene, he got held up at gunpoint. Y'all thinking, oh, this poor old guy. And he says, how much more? How much more am I going to be tested in this life? As he was talking to a reporter in the New York Daily News. He was talking to her about the accounts that he had for the 10 years of his agony. As if he hadn't endured enough, this 38-year-old man from Mount Vernon, New York, said that the insurance company wanted to cut off his workman's comp benefits. And his landlord had threatened to kick him out of his apartment. So depression and suffering from angoriophobia. Am I saying that right? Agoraphobia. There you go. That is a fear of leaving your own house. He was suffering from that. Henrietta used a canister of oxygen and took 42 pills every day. He's kind of like me. He rattled when he walked. He did all this to battle his heart disease, his liver ailment. But with the help of neighbors and former co-workers, he has not given up yet. There is always hope, he said. That article was printed in the Los Angeles Times in March of 1995. He said there was always hope, regardless of what he was going through, what situations he was facing. He said there was always hope. Have you ever found yourself at the doorpost of a surrender? You ever found yourself ready to give up? Just ready to throw in the towel, so to speak? Henrietta was probably one of those folks. You would think that he would be a person that would be ready to throw in the towel. We're going to talk about a very familiar story this morning. And all of us remember this story. But you remember David and his notorious affair. And then the murder of Uriah. You remember reading about the rape of his daughter Tamar. And his son, by his son Abnon. And then Abnon's death. And now Ananiah is attempting to steal his kingdom. And that's been the kingdom that has been promised to Solomon. And David's nightmares seem to never stop. They just seem to be one right after the other. And David was probably sitting there about to write Psalm 71. If you want to go back later on today and read Psalm 71, Psalm 71 is just basically a cry for help. That's what it is. And he's sitting there and he's about to get ready to write Psalm 71, and he starts asking, I've served you so long, Lord. I've served you so long. Why do I get rewarded like this? David knew he had made a lot of mistakes. Yeah, he had sinned. And those sins would bring consequences to him, to his family, consequences to his kingdom later on down the road. As many Christians, not as many, but as all of us do not get a get out of pain or get out of suffering free card, do we? It's not the life of Monopoly here. We don't get those free cards. Most of us are familiar with the story of David and Goliath. We're familiar with that. You mean we've learned about that ever since we became a Christian? If you went to church when you was younger, you learned about it then. It's one of the greatest victories in the Scripture. And I'm going to give you just a quick rundown version of it. I'm going to give you the WWJD version here. What would Jimmy's paraphrase be? Okay? Of those 58 verses. Now the Philistines got ready for war, and they brought all of their soldiers to this certain town in Judea that they were gonna attack. And the Philistines had this hero named Goliath. Goliath was 9 foot tall. And the Philistines, they were there, and Goliath, you know, I could almost hear Arnold Schwarzenegger voice in Goliath. I mean, I can't talk like that, but if I would, I would. I could give you a Katie voice, but no, that wouldn't match the theme here. But Goliath, he would come out and he would say, "I'm the best soldier of our army. Choose your best soldier, and we'll fight." Well, Saul and all of his men were scared to death of Goliath. And you know, David's 3 brothers, they had gone off to fight in Saul's army. And David stayed home to take care of what? The sheep. And Goliath would come out and challenge them every morning and every evening. And one day, Jesse told David, he said, "Hurry up and take some food to the camp for your brothers." And while David was at the camp visiting them, Goliath came out and started his boasting as usual, like he usually did. And David asked, "What will a man get for killing that Philistine and shutting him up?" So some of the soldiers overheard David talking about this, and they went and they told King Saul what David said. So Saul sent for David and brought him in, and he said, "David, you're a little scrawny guy. You don't have a chance." David told him, he said, "Sir," he said, "I've killed a lion, and I've killed bears, and I will kill this worthless Philistine." All right, Saul said, "Go ahead. Go ahead and fight him." And Saul told him, he said, "I hope the Lord will be with you." Basically, he was sending him out to his own death sentence. So David tried on the king's armor, but he couldn't even walk around in it. And he took it off and he said, "I can't use this stuff." He said, "This is just so uncomfortable." So he went out to a stream and he grabbed up 5 stones. Smooth stones, ones that would sail real good, nothing to interfere with the way they fly. He got these 5 stones, and he with them, he went and he saw Goliath. And Goliath looks at him, and he looks at him, and all he sees is this good-looking little kid coming at him, and he starts making fun of him. And David told him, he said, "When I'm finished with you," he said, "I'll feed you to the birds." David said, "You've come to fight me with sword and spear. And I've come to fight you in the name of the Lord of the heavens most high." When Goliath started forward, when he started towards David, David ran towards him. He put a rock in the sling, slung it around. When he let go of one strap, the rock came out and it hit Goliath right between the ears. It hit him in the head. It cracked his skull and he fell face down on the ground. David ran over, pulled out Goliath's own sword, and used it to cut off his head. There you go. There's your rundown version of what happened to David and Goliath. David, a little shepherd boy, stands to face Goliath, this big giant, in battle. And he wins. This is the kind of story we all like to hear, don't we? We all like to hear the little guy, the underdog, winning. After all, who doesn't have a giant or two in your life that taunts you, that tries to make your life miserable? What do we do with the giants in our own lives? Everybody seems to give us advice, don't they? It's a lot easier to advise someone else about defeating the giants in their lives than it is to receive advice to defeat the giants in our lives. It's kind of like the speck and the plank. Remember the parable Jesus talked about like that? You know, don't try to get the speck out of your neighbor's eye before you get the plank out of your own eye. It's kind of like giving somebody else advice and you don't want to receive advice. Have you ever heard about the wise advice for kids? It goes like this. It says, never trust a dog to watch your food. Never tell your mama her diet isn't working. When your mama's mad at your daddy, don't let her brush your hair. And puppy's breath still smells bad even though they've eaten Tic Tacs. Felt markers are not good to use for lipstick. Never baptize your cat. And stay away from prunes. And don't pull your daddy's finger when he touches you. These guys have learned some valuable lessons in life experiences, haven't they? We can learn some valuable lessons about the life and the story between David and Goliath. First thing we can learn is facing a giant is an intimidating experience. We can look back at David's bravery and his victory from 3,000 plus years. And this distance sometimes lessens our viewpoint of how David felt at that very time. Let's look at the encounter of this. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 17. And we'll look at verse 4. And it says, Then Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was over 9 foot tall. Verse 5 says he wore a bronze helmet and his bronze coat of mail. You don't know what that is. That's the vest that they wear. It looks like little chains hooked together. They say that weighed 125 pounds. He also wore a bronze leg armor, and he carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. Verse 7 says, the staff of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam. A weaver's beam, if you look that up, it's something that's part of a weaving machine deal. And they said that beam, that part of that main beam of a weaver stand, is about 2.5 inches thick. So it would be like, his spear would be like carrying around something about that big around. Right? On top of that, it was tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. That is 2 gallons of milk. Take 2 gallons of milk, that's 16 pounds, so that's about what it weighs. Put that in one hand and think that's what was on the end of his spear. Alright, that's kind of give you you got a vision now what I'm trying to get across to you here? That's pretty intimidating, isn't it? Facing giants can be an intimidating experience. But it wasn't just the size. It wasn't just the size that would have overwhelmed us. his body armor he had body armor from head to toe. And everything that he had on weighed about 175 pounds, thereabouts. It's almost like carrying around a person. Plus, his armor bearer walked ahead of him carrying a shield. Goliath didn't even carry his own shield. The armor bearer carried it for him. Now that would be a pretty intimidating sight, wouldn't it? If it was coming at you, that would be something to kind of shaking your boots about. But according to verse 16 in the same chapter, for 40 days, every morning and every evening, this Philistine, he would come out shouting in front of the Israelite army, strutting around, strutting stuff, and just mocking, taunting. Goliath would march around out there crowing like a banty rooster, flaunting his size and everything, his strength at him, daring someone to take him on. Now this is intimidating. But aren't all of our giants in our life intimidating? That's why we call them giants, because they are bigger than we are. That's how it is with the giants that we face. The giants of fear and worry, our giants of doubt and anxiety, our giants of depression and loneliness. They don't just come once. They do like he did. They come every morning, they come every evening, they come day after day, constantly trying to intimidate us. We've all been in a place where we've had to deal with giants. Whatever it's been, we've wandered through this dry valley looking for answers. Sometimes we come up empty. We feel a lot like David standing in the shadow of Goliath. The truth is, we have a choice. And we're faced with the question, who are we relying on to defeat our giants? Who are we counting on to carry our burdens? They may come in the form of a person. They may come in the form of oppression, of worry. Our giants come in all different shapes, forms, and fashions. Few things are more intimidating than fear and worries, aren't they? Especially when we try to face them on our own strength, in our own strength, with our own strength. When the battle comes and our giants are at our door, it's usually intimidating, isn't it? And sometimes it will send us into full retreat. When they intimidate us, we get tongue-tied. Our thoughts get confused. When our giants intimidate us, we forget to pray. We focus on the odds that are against us. We forget who it is we represent But David's eyes weren't on that giant. Intimidation played no part in David's life. He may have appeared like an ant against an elephant here. You know, it was so far mismatched, but David wasn't listening to the others. He told Goliath in verse 45, he said, I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies. This was the secret of David's life. It's something we need to think about. We need to stop waiting on the devil and fearing his arrival. Rather, we need to be looking out for him. Because the giants that we face, the battles that we face, these battles are the Lord's. What did David do in verse 48? David ran at him, didn't he? He didn't sit back, wait for him to come to him. David ran at him. He ran towards his giant. He approached his giant. Are we trying to do our own battling? Are we trying to fight things our way? Trying to outsmart our enemy, outfox him? We can't. But God can. Why? Because the giants that we face, the battles that we face, those battles are God's. David lived by a very special principle. Nothing to prove, nothing to lose. He didn't try to impress anybody in the army of Israel. He didn't try to impress his brothers. He didn't try to impress God. He just ran at Goliath. He just ran at his giant. So this morning, our giants are waiting on us as well. Every one of us have them, don't we? Every one of us have a giant that we face in our lives. And we can either let that thing intimidate us, steal our joy, steal our peace, steal our security. Or we can face them in the power and the strength of Jesus. Put them in retreat. This battle is the Lord's battle. Another lesson we could learn from this story about David and Goliath is doing battle can be a lonely experience. When we're in a battle, when we're in a fight, it's a big deal, isn't it? It may not be a big deal to somebody else, but it's a big deal to us. Someone may say, oh, it'll be all right, don't worry about it. But to us, it's our Goliath. Our Goliath is our Goliath. And we always want to call for backup, don't we? It's kind of like the new police officer when he was in academy. He was coming through the police academy and he was asked during an exam, he said, what would you do if you had to arrest your mama? The young officer replied, he said, I would call for help. We can ask counselors, we can ask pastors, we can ask parents, we can ask friends for help. They can give us support, but our Goliath is our Goliath. It can be lonely, but it's only lonely on the battlefield where we learn. It's on the lonely battlefield where we learn to lean on God. Sometimes during a time of standing by faith, we receive flack, don't we? We receive something from somebody that is don't understand what we're going through. Look at verse 28, chapter 17. It says, when David's brother, his oldest brother, Eliab, heard David talking to the men, he was angry. He said, what are you doing around here anyway? What about those few sheep you're supposed to be taking care of? He says, I know about your pride and deceit. You just want to see the battle. Now, Eliab remembered this was his little brother. The one that had been anointed by the prophet Samuel to be king over him. Now was his time to express his irritation, his aggravation, his disapproval, his anger. Now was the time for him to take it out on David. He had allowed it to build up so much in his heart, being turned down as king. He asked David, he said, what are you doing around here? His attack on David, he was attacking David's motive, wasn't he? Then he asked the second question that meant to humiliate David. He said, hey David, he said, what about those few little sheep you're supposed to be taking care of? What's going on with them? Then he really gets angry. He gets ugly. He gets all puffed up. He says, I know about your pride and your deceit. You just wanted to see the battle. The enemy would love to get our attention, love to get us off of what is important. The average person would have rolled up his sleeves and used his energy to punch his lights out. And I've got a little note wrote down here, and I'm glad he's here today. It says, speed. Speed. When you were growing up, if your brothers, one of your brothers was to insult you like that in front of some other guys, what would have happened? It wouldn't have been pretty, would it? The fight would have been on, wouldn't it? It doesn't matter which one. They said they used to fight just for fun. So, you know, it kind of reminds me of one of my uncles. My dad had 6 brothers. There were 7 boys. And the one right under Daddy, he said he would go out at night just looking for a fight. He just loved to fight. And I thought, you know, something wrong with y'all. And he's still alive. Most of the other brothers are gone. He's still going. He's the one that's fought all his life. But rather than dealing with his older brother Eliab, rather than biting back, knocking his lights out, David rather wanted to deal with Goliath, didn't he? Isn't that what Satan wants us to do? He tries to get us to take our focus off of what's important. And put it on the extra stuff, the stuff that has no significance of anything. But David ignores his brother and turns around. He knew who he was fighting. He knew who to fight and who to leave alone. We need to choose our battles wisely. If we don't watch our battles, if we don't watch who we're fighting, we will end up fighting the brothers and sisters while the enemy of our souls is roaming around in our territory, wreaking havoc, spreading hate and discontent, and winning victory after victory. This morning, let's remember where our battle lies. It's not with our children. Children, it's not with your parents. Okay? There's a few children in here I can point out that it's not with your parents. It's not with our friends. It's not with our spouse. It's not with other members of the body of Christ. We are not fighting against humans. We are fighting against forces and authorities and against rulers of darkness and powers in the spiritual world. So let's stop wasting our energy in fighting those we need and those who need us. Because the battles that we're fighting, the giants that we face, this is the Lord's battle. The story teaches us that trusting God is a stabilizing experience. Okay? Now, I'm not very stable sometimes. Susan's more stable than I am. Well, I had to walk with 3 legs, and you're walking with 2, so I would say you're more stable than me. But trusting God is a stabilizing experience. David brought down Goliath with the first stone. Brought down Goliath with the first stone because his aim was on the mark. It was right on. It appears in Scripture that he wasn't the least bit nervous, was he? When you read the story, you don't see anything being nervous about it. He was stable in God. If we try to tackle our giants in the flesh, we can't do it. We'll lose. But when we have spent plenty of time wearing out the knees of our britches in prayer, it's unbelievable how stable we can be. Goliath had all the normal things. He had all the things that would normally oppress, all the things that would normally intimidate and cause fear on his side. But David had been given the ability to see God in everything, to see God as God is. He wasn't impressed, he wasn't intimidated by Goliath's size, no matter how big our giant may be. God is bigger. No matter how powerful our giant may be, God is all powerful. David trusted in God. If we tolerate a Goliath, he will take over our territory. If we tolerate a giant, he will take over our territory. He'll move into our camp. He will take our thoughts that normally need to be on God, and he will put them on himself. That's why we can't afford to tolerate giants. We have to kill them. Giants don't look. The giant didn't look that impressive to David. Because God had been in his past. And he knew it. He knew that God had been with him. Listen to what the confidence that he had in his voice when he's talking to Saul. Look at verse 37. It says, the Lord rescued me. The Lord rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear. He will rescue me from this Philistine. Trusting in God can move a mountain. Can. Jesus says it can. Trusting in God can move a mountain. It can knock giants down with one little rock. It just depends on how much trust we have. Do you trust God in your life? And let go of it. Simple as that. Give your problems, your giants to God. And see what he can do. I don't know what God needs to do for you today, but you need to trust him. There's one more lesson we need to learn from this. We need to learn from this story. Winning victories is a memorable experience. So often, when facing our giants, we forget what we are to remember. And we remember what we are to forget, don't we? We remember the defeats, and we forget the victories, don't we? Most of us can probably repeat aloud some of our failures in graphic detail, but would be hard pressed to name specifics of some of God's amazing victories in our life. David didn't have that problem. He says, you know why I can fight Goliath, Saul? I'm paraphrasing here. He says, because the same God who gave me power over the lion and the bear will give me power over Goliath. It's God who will empower me. It's interesting that after David killed Goliath, after the defeat of him, that he drags all of Goliath's weapons. He drags all of his stuff into his tent. It's no doubt to remind him of what God had done. He probably laid that sword and whatever else he brought with him. He probably laid it there by that lion's skull, and by that bear's claws. Just as a reminder of what God can do. Winning victories is extremely memorable, unforgettable. Remember them. So where do you keep your memories? Where do you keep your memories? Do you just store them away somewhere? Forget about them? Think about them every once in a while? Let's break that habit. Because God doesn't waste victories. When God pulls something off that only he can do, he says to us, don't forget that. In the Old Testament, God had his people pile up rocks, pile up stones, as to remind them of the victories that he had won on their behalf. And those stones of remembrance were to remind them to remember. To remember. So this morning, you may feel the weight of the world is on you. But I can assure you that you are in your past. In your past, God has given you some victories. So recover those victories. Go back in that memory bank somewhere and pull those victories out. And think about it. Allow them to give you courage to face your present giant. Because this is the Lord's battle. I'll close with this. I don't know what your intimidating giant is today. It may be a person. It may be a sickness. It may be a family issue. Depression, worry, fear, an addiction, a habit, an attitude, a financial trouble, a failing marriage, a broken relationship, a lawsuit, or unemployment. You know, maybe it wasn't in any of that list of you. I don't know what your giant is today. It could be anything that can sap your energy, drain our faith. But remember this. This is the Lord's battle. God is saying to us, all I'm asking is 5 smooth stones and a sling of faith. And I'll take it from here. It's all He's asking from us. You don't have to wear anybody else's armor. Just trust Him. So remember, this is the Lord's battle. Maybe you don't even know what your giant is today. But it's there. It's there haunting you, digging at you. The uncertainty alone is a giant, isn't it? So remember, this battle is the Lord's battle. It belongs to Him.